It is a new year and a new legislative session is now underway. Lawmakers are back right there at the State House, ready to help shape the future of Indiana. Thank you so much for joining us for Crossroads Politics here on WTHR Plus. I'm Dustin Grove, and in just a little bit, we're going to hear from my guest, Nikki Kelly, with the Indiana Capitol Chronicle. But first, I want to head to the State House, where Emily Longnecker has been for every minute of this session since even before they gavelled in. And fitting, Emily, for a budget year, lawmakers, they're going to be talking about money. It's going to be a tight year.
Yeah, Dustin, you know, lawmakers, especially Republicans, are already talking about how in this budget session, the state is going to need to tighten its belt because there's less revenue coming into the state than in years past. Bottom line, crafting a budget is about two things: how much things cost and how to pay for them. Now, the two big things, the vast majority of the budget are spent on two items: education and Medicaid. The state has almost 1 million students in K through 12 across the state in about 1,200 schools. There's also about 700,000 Hoosiers on Medicaid. A lot of those folks signed up during the pandemic, and lawmakers thought that by this time that number would have come back down to 300,000. It hasn't. Paying for both education and Medicaid, plus paying for all the other things that the state offers is a challenge. Lawmakers say it's going to be a challenge. Dustin?
Yeah, paying for both education and Medicaid, plus everything else state government does, that is going to be a challenge, especially considering Indiana isn't bringing in as much money as it has in past years either. Tax collections, we've mentioned, they've fallen nearly across the board, including sales taxes, individual income taxes, and corporate taxes, and all of this while lawmakers are also trying to cut property taxes too. Hoosiers, Emily, I know you've covered this, I've covered this. They have made it very clear this has to be addressed. I want to play a clip from a homeowner down in Bloomington. I spoke with her a couple months ago. She says her property taxes have more than doubled in 7 years. Take a listen here.
First is panic because it's uncontrollable. And then I'm mad. I'm really mad. I'll tell you, Dustin, what bothers me the most about property taxes is that I'm going to pay this house off. This is my home, but it could be taken away from me if for some reason, when I'm not working anymore, I can't pay the taxes. That's terrible.
This is the kind of thing lawmakers on both sides of the political aisle are hearing, Emily.
Yeah, property tax relief is at the top of the agendas of both sides, Republicans and Democrats. And as you heard from that woman right there, we have been hearing about high property taxes and the need for property tax relief since the election. It was a top priority, as we heard there from voters. It's also a top priority at the top of Governor-elect Braun's agenda. He wants to cap property tax increases to 2% and 3%. House Speaker Todd Houston told us they want to get it done, but it's all about finding the balance. Take a listen.
We want to provide property tax relief to Hoosiers, but we also want to make sure that they have the necessary services that are needed in our community. So, you know, that's obviously going to be the balance that we're going to have to work on through the session, and confident by the end we'll find that balance, but it'll be a work in progress.
And Democrats also agree that property taxes have to be a top priority, but they acknowledge it's not as simple as just making cuts. House Minority Leader Phil Giaquinta tied rising property taxes to house speculation, saying that's what's helping drive up home assessments, leading to higher tax bills.
Coastal elites are hollowing out our communities by buying up homes and jacking up the prices, whether that be in our cities or suburban cul-de-sacs. Working class Hoosiers need relief, but we can't endanger our schools or police, fire, or EMS. We need to give relief in the form of a property tax credit, system-wide reform that takes the pressure off homestead properties and making it easier for young people to buy their first home. We don't need higher property taxes, we need more homeowners.
So as you heard right there from Leader Giaquinta, the Democrats really believe one thing that's driving up property taxes anyway is folks from out of state coming in, buying up properties, and then jacking up the prices. Dustin?
You know, it's important to point out, though, that property tax revenue, they don't pay for many state services, do they? Those primarily go to local communities, right? For police, fire, EMS, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's right. The state sets the base property tax rate. That money collected at that rate goes to fund local services, local government, with the largest portion going to education. The state never sees a dime of that money raised from property tax. Property taxes also fund things like police, firefighters, emergency services. Some areas have higher property taxes because school districts pass referenda to increase the property tax revenue that they're getting in to their school budgets. Dustin?
It is such a tricky issue. There's a lot to it, very complex. We're going to be back with you in a minute to talk about how those local property taxes interact with the state budget, Emily. But I want to bring in Nikki Kelly, editor of the Indiana Capitol Chronicle, who joins me now. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've heard now from the Republicans, Democrats, there are a lot of proposals here on how to tackle property taxes. What do you think realistically is going to come out of the State House this session?
Yeah, I think realistically we'll see some kind of tinkering around the edges versus large overhauls. I know incoming Governor Mike Braun really wants to kind of reset and then cap them going forward. But when he talked about that on the campaign trail, we never had a fiscal impact of that. So now that they're going to file a bill with that plan, we'll get to see exactly how much money this would take from local coffers. And I get it. No one loves property taxes, right? They're not fun to pay, but you like when the firefighters show up to your house and you want to go to the local library and you want them to pick up your trash.
You need the streets cleared of the snow.
Yeah, and so, when Speaker Houston said a balance, that's a big deal because they have to figure out how to control them a little more, but also make sure we're not taking away $1 billion from local government.
What do you think makes property taxes such a tough issue for lawmakers to handle?
I think it's especially tough because, they created the property tax system as the state legislature, but they don't actually get anything from it. And so people want them to solve it, but to solve it, it hurts another level of government. And so I think that is the tricky part is, they want to be responding to their constituents and help them, but those services aren't free.
Yeah.
And so
It's difficult politically. You have, because we've heard state lawmakers say, well, this is primarily a local issue. And then local government officials say, well, yes, but it's got to be, the change has to be made at the state level. So kind of a little bit of finger pointing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No one wants to be the one who's in charge of raising taxes. Everyone wants to lower them. But I think I think state lawmakers are going to be kind of pushing locals to use other options they have, whether that be wheel taxes or local income taxes. So I think they're going to try to take the pressure off property taxes, but that doesn't necessarily mean, we won't make up for it elsewhere.
Yeah. Emily, let's bring you back in now. Property tax is definitely a prickly issue here, but even though the money goes to local government, it does play into the state budget battle too, doesn't it?
Yeah, Dustin, it all comes back to education. Property taxes aren't the only funding revenue for local school districts. The state spends a lot of money on education, nearly half of the budget. During the last budget session in 2023, lawmakers expanded Indiana's voucher program to about 95% of Hoosier families. So if a family wants to send their kid to something other than a traditional public school, the money from the state that comes out of the general fund, it follows the student to the school of their choice. Now, Governor-elect Braun has said he wants to make private school vouchers universal, meaning any family, no matter what their income is, could send their kid to whatever school they want. And again, the state education money follows the student. Braun's position has been echoed by Republican lawmakers.
University vouchers will always be a priority for me, and I think it's a priority for our caucus.
Democrats want to make up for any reduced property tax revenues by shifting more state money to public schools, not give more state money to support private school vouchers.
There's a focus on completely expanding vouchers to the wealthiest Hoosier families today from the party in control. And those dollars, those extra dollars that will go now to send private kids, private school wealthy family students to the schools they're already going to on the public dime could instead be spent on pre-K for all.
Yeah, so Republicans, though, they are leaning the other way, wanting to shift that property tax revenue from funding traditional public schools to shift that revenue more towards charters and private schools. That's where we see HB 1136. It would dissolve public school districts where more than half the kids who live in that district go to a school outside the district. That would include IPS here in Indy. You can go to WTHR.com to hear reaction from local folks about 1136, but we're also hearing from both parties already about that bill. Take a listen.
It's just, and another point that we may look at is that, is that really what they want, or is it something else to use it as a tool to get something else in regards to education?
You know, when a disproportionate, kids are in a district are going to a charter school, my biggest issue is that the districts share revenue, local property tax dollars, to support those students. If you're about student-centered, well, if you're student-centered, you'd want to make sure that the public charter schools that are in your district, in which the majority of the kids in the district go to these public charter schools, would receive some local property tax money to support their operations and their transportation.
Some lawmakers have suggested that 1136 is really about trying to force a compromise, trying to force some kind of legislation that would require public school districts to share more of their property tax revenue with the charter schools in their district. That thought brought strong condemnation from one Democratic senator who herself is an IPS parent and has been an IPS teacher and a principal.
Sending entire communities into a panic is not the way to come to a negotiating table. That is not good faith. My own child came home from school, her high school in IPS, a district that she's been a part of for 11 years, worried about whether or not her school would exist next year. The kids in her classroom at the cafeteria table were talking about this. That is not the way to negotiate in good faith, and that's not how we do legislation here in Indiana.
So strong word there from Democratic Senator Andrea Hunley, who says, who told us yesterday that Democrats' goal is to make sure that 1136 never sees the light of day. In fact, never gets out of the House and gets over to the Senate. Dustin?
All right, we'll come back to you just a second. Emily, I want to bring in Nikki again. This sounds like just the latest round in this decades-long fight over vouchers and charter schools, and it's such a stark philosophical difference.
It is. I mean, Republicans believe in school choice, and that's the end of it, school choice. It'd be one thing, I think, if people were comparing the outcomes that we're seeing for our children, but they're not really. The charter schools, I think, are doing worse than some of the traditional public schools, many of them, especially in graduation rates. So some of it is just about choice, period. And funding. I mean, that's what it comes down to. And lawmakers have increased the state funding level for charters in recent budgets. And now it appears they obviously want to increase the property tax level that they'll get, because right now they don't really get any property tax money.
Democrats and Republicans are also divided on what to do with Medicaid, right, Emily? That's another huge issue that they're tackling this year. They've got to. They have no choice.
Yeah. Right. That's a fight that's been going on for a while. You know, Medicaid had that $1 billion shortfall that was announced last year from the Family and Social Services Administration. That shortfall really surprised lawmakers. Thousands of Hoosiers signed up for Medicaid during the pandemic, and those Hoosiers were supposed to come off those Medicaid rolls over the past 2 years, bringing those numbers down. But that didn't happen. It didn't go as expected.
That quote-unquote billion-dollar hit was what Milliman was, because they predicted 400,000 people coming off of it, and only 225 came off of 2 years ago. The work requirement is going to be very problematic for individuals.
Senate Senate Republicans have proposed bringing back a work requirement for Hoosiers, adults without kids who want to be on the Healthy Indiana Plan, HIP, in order to receive that Medicaid coverage. That would have some exceptions. Obviously, if someone is disabled or pregnant, that work requirement would be waived. That's a proposal. Another proposal to cut Medicaid costs would be to limit the amount of time someone could be on the Healthy Indiana Plan for 3 years, and also cap the number of people who could be on that program to 500,000.
It puts the caps in place. It does put a limitation of 36 months to be on the program. That's aggregate, so you could be on a few months and off a few months. And just keep in mind that this is childless adults that are able-bodied working individuals that are on this plan and will continue to be on this plan. I think this is a start.
That was Republican State Senator Ryan Mishler, who drafted Senate Bill 2 that puts these caps in place. And we heard him say there at the end that this is just the start, that this is a proposal. We're only a few days in to this year's legislative session, so lawmakers haven't finalized anything yet. So certainly being 2 days in, we've got some time to see how this evolves. Dustin?
Emily, Nikki Kelly from the Indiana Capitol Chronicle, how do you think lawmakers are going to tackle this Medicaid issue?
It's going to be hard because those are we talk about a number, how many people are on Medicaid, but every single person on is a person, who needs health insurance and coverage. And so when you're talking about containing costs, it's hard to do that without kicking people off the program. Yeah. And so that's the struggle that they're going to face. And, they seem to be focusing on the HIP part of Medicaid, which are sort of the more working adults than, say, disabled and elderly and those who are on traditional Medicaid. But, there's only so much blood you can sort of squeeze out of that population. And what's interesting is the caps they want, the limitations. That HIP program is paid 90-10 by the federal government. Right. So we actually don't pay a lot of state money for that segment of people because we have a higher rate of reimbursement from the federal government than we do traditional Medicaid. So I'm not even sure that's going to actually save the state that much money. And the 10% is currently paid for by a hospital assessment fee by hospitals in the state.
However, we also know Indiana has what's called a trigger law. One of, I think, maybe 9 or so states that have this trigger law that says if the federal government cuts a certain amount of federal funding to Medicaid, that can allow states that triggers states, so to speak, to eliminate things like the Healthy Indiana Plan.
Yeah,
Is that right?
And the trigger law only applies to the HIP program.
Yep.
And the idea, again, being because we're at that 90-10 level, basically, if the federal government would decide, no, we want to do the normal 80-20 split or 70-30, whatever, then the HIP plan would have to have some real changes made by lawmakers. And that would actually cost the state money. So that program would be in sincere trouble then.
Do you think that would actually happen, though? Do you think that's a huge funding cut by the feds?
I actually don't. If it would happen, it would take quite a long time, and we'd have some preparation time. Okay. But that law does exist. I mean, lawmakers could easily remove that trigger law. But, and again, I just want to point out that we're talking about that's 700,000 people on HIP. We've got like 1 million over here on traditional Medicaid. So, they seem to be focusing on this pot, but we have a larger pot over here that is costing way more. In fact, elderly people who are on Medicaid, I think they only make up under 10% of the population, but more than 40% of the costs. So.
All right, so all they have to do this session is the budget and figure out vouchers and property taxes. No problem. Yeah. Final takeaways.
Yeah, I mean, my final takeaway from the first week is just, it started out very traditionally and no big surprises, but next week we'll get a new governor and watching Mike Braun and how he's going to approach, dealing with the legislature is going to be fascinating for the year.
All right, Nikki Kelly with the Capitol Chronicle, thank you so much. Can't wait to see you next week. Our 13 Investigates team is following several bills this session tied to issues they've reported on this year. Our 13 Investigates reporter Sierra Putman is here now. And Sierra, today you were talking about protecting students and adults at school events. This is a story that's been that you've been paying very close attention to.
Yes, and we're looking at one key bill that's talking about AEDs in schools. Those are the devices that would restart a heart when it stops. And the lawmaker who wrote this bill is saying that this would require both the plan and the AEDs to use them, which is the issue we have really been focusing on with our sideline investigation.
Senator Linda Rogers shared a copy of the new law she's proposing. It would require schools to follow recommendations by the American Heart Association when creating specific emergency action plans for each location. These plans would require schools to have AEDs and to keep them within 1 to 3 minutes of certain activities. The bill would also have the state create another school AED report to better understand how many AEDs are in schools and where they are kept.
And it not only requires the department to conduct the survey, but the schools to participate. It was disappointing last time that only half of the schools actually participated.
So the goal of this proposal is to make sure every school has AEDs and a clear, specific plan to use them effectively.
And you talked with parents, coaches, survivors, and a doctor who they all say AEDs, it's clear that these are saving lives.
And that's the reason why we are continuing to follow this story and to follow these efforts, because we know it can help kids and adults.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for following it. And that is it for this week's Crossroads Politics. We'll be back here on WTHR Plus every Sunday of this 2025 legislative session, taking you inside the conversations shaping your state. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.